what do I want to be singing on my deathbed?
Abraham's watching.
I think like my parents were a little bit concerned in many ways because they felt that I was maybe being a little bit too intense and academic about my faith development. Um, I I recall some conversations where my parents, like, I would say there was a time where I was very fundamentalist and very judgmental. Um, I think I decided around grade 4 or 5 to not listen to any music other than Christian music. And that was really because at the time my great grandmother had passed away and she was in her mid 90s when she passed away. And in the last couple of weeks of her life, she kind of lost the ability to communicate, except for she could recite scripture in Dutch or English, and she could sing songs. And the songs that she learned as a kid were hymns. And I just thought that was like an incredible testimony to leave to her family and her grandkids, was that like as everything was leaving her, her ability to move, her ability to communicate and everything else, the last thing that remained was her faith, was her ability to sing and to recite scripture, and that was so ingrained in her body that that was the last thing to go. And I was just like, at the time, the Spice Girls and Britney Spears were popular. And like, I knew that I'm very much like a musician as well. And like, music just sticks in my head so easily. And I'm like, what do I want to be singing on my deathbed when I die? Do I want to be singing Britney Spears and Spice Girls? Or do I want to be singing, communicating the way my great grandmother was? And so like I was just like, okay, this is what I want in my brain. And I very actively, like, that was all I would communicate, like all I would listen to for years. And I was like developing what living as a Christian meant for me at the time. I would say when I was young in my faith, I didn't understand why other people did not. Like, I was very much an idealist. I didn't understand why other people didn't have those same ideals. So I would get irritated with other people who would call themselves Christians but would live different ways than me, and probably very judgmental. I like to call myself now like a recovering fundamentalist.
I like that.
I'm like, there's still this, like, every now and then I'll come across something and I'll be like, oh, that's pretty ingrained in my head. And where does that prejudice come from? And I'm like, I'll have to unpack something. But I think I've become much more mellow as I've matured. I think it's like maturing in your faith. I would say going to Christian university had like a very mellowing effect on me. Which was interesting because, like, I would say some of like Christian elementary school and Christian high school really set me up to be some of that fundamentalist. But going to Christian university, there was Christians from over 50 different denominations at my university. And everybody had different ways of expressing their faith, like very different ways of expressing their faith. And that was interesting to see. But then they were also all super passionate about their faith. There wasn't that person who, like, many of them had done the work and their faith was their own. And so I was seeing people who I respected their faith, but I was also seeing that their faith was different and that they were expressing it differently. So they would have very differing views on issues, but I also would like worship with them on chapel during the week, and like see, I'm like, yeah, no, like we share the same beliefs, but we're expressing them differently. Yeah. And I think that like really started to mellow me out to see that there was that sort of difference, but we also, like, I could respect their faith. Like, it wasn't like it was something that didn't matter to them. It very clearly mattered to them. Mm-hmm. I mean, the amount you have to pay for attending a Christian university, I mean, it's a bit of a sacrifice in and of itself. And so, like, I was respecting that, and then seeing that they were expressing their faith differently, and it kind of mellowed me a bit, I think. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And then, like, after university, because I recently realized that university was 10 years ago. And after university, it's been very interesting because like I've said before, I'm very academic in the way I have my faith. And to not have that daily Christian education of like learning everything and learning it through a Christian perspective. So I'm not saying that we learned like math by like counting the animals on the ark or something. Like it wasn't that. It was more like we learned math and then we might discuss like what are the uses of math and why, like we'd have ethics and we'd even just the understanding of like doing something well and pursuing it with excellence. And like, if that's your calling, like pursuing it with excellence because all of life is worship, that sort of thing. So I think like the biggest benefit I took from Christian education was this idea of everything being important to God, whether it's, you know, a mathematical equation or a chemical formula or, you know, learning about social science and justice and history and that sort of thing. All of that was considered worship, and became very purposeful. And so it really helped me develop like a strong sense of purpose, to the point that when I went to work, I had to be cautious that I didn't become a workaholic. Yeah, like, because I felt like I would get frustrated with coworkers that had this attitude of like, oh, that's good enough. I was like, oh, no, like everything must be perfect. Like we've got to do our best. And my first job out of university was my dream job, really. I was working for the Ministry of Natural Resources, which was exactly what I wanted to do. And I was studying biogeochemistry of northern fen peatlands, and doing climate change research related to wetlands, basically looking at the carbon dynamics of peatlands in northern Ontario. So there's climate change dynamics, there's resource extraction dynamics, and it was just fascinating to me. As someone who studies chemistry and ecology, I was just like, this is what I want to do. And I could feel like this massive sense of purpose in the work that I was doing. So that was really exciting. And then it was really frustrating to run up against people that it was just a job to them. Like to me, it was more than a job. It was a calling as I dig soil pits in northern Ontario. And so to find the person that's kind of grumbling about it and doesn't like that work and doesn't feel like totally fulfilled by sorting, you know, for soil samples in the middle of January. I was like, it was frustrating to me to come across that difference, but I also kind of realized like the benefit that I had of that philosophical background and understanding and connecting, you know, my vocation or my work with this like bigger purpose or this thing that mattered the most to me, my faith, the fact that like I really felt that the work that I was doing mattered to my faith.
In terms of coming from that more reformed background and being in a science as kind of a career now, how do you reconcile your faith with that science? I know like a lot of academic pursuits kind of can sometimes conflict with faith beliefs, or that's the perception that most people have. So how do you kind of break that perception?
I would say the key thing is that term that you're saying, that perception. I think definitely culture has kind of set up this perception that faith and science have to be at odds.